Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of BrainScratch. I'm your host John Lorden. Thank you for joining me today. I have to say before I start this one, this is probably the toughest episode I've ever had to film. I was contacted by the mother of the person that died that we're going to be talking about today. Here is a picture of his Facebook page. His name is Christopher Erick, and it was almost 4 years ago now that he passed away. And this one is really hard for me because, of course, speaking with his mother a lot in email over the past few weeks has really kind of pulled me closer to the subject matter than I sometimes get. But outside of that, there are some things that his mother, some beliefs that she might have that I might not necessarily line up with. And I know that that is why so many of you, my audience out there, respect my coverage of things, because I'm very honest with you. And I expect that his mother, Kim, is expecting the same thing out of me. So I'm not going to try to, dance around these topics or curb any of those points that I want to make. I am just going to be completely honest about my assessment of what is going on here. And I first want to recognize that this is a woman that is in pain. And the pain, I think, extends even beyond the passing of her son. This is a family that had some really rough stumbles growing up together. And I think this is just the latest turn in two factions that are extremely hurt and don't know really how to deal with each other. Of course, I'm speaking about her half of her family, but also Christopher's father and some of the family members around that. Now, does that mean that I don't think something odd happened here? Not at all. I do think that we will get to an understanding where maybe Kim and I actually do line up, but some of the details around it, which I think are pretty important details, might be taking away a bit from her argument or how she's presenting it online, which might be not helping her in the best way. And I'm hopeful that maybe this video will just help her think about those things a little bit, and maybe she can address those. She has a really good website where she has been doing all this work, and I have to say, I can't imagine doing what she has done in this case. She has become a private investigator, essentially. She has documented everything she can. She's recording conversations. She's chasing down her own leads. It is pretty amazing to see the work that she has done in this, but outside of that, you have to recognize that she is his mother, and her judgment and her perception are going to be colored a bit by that relationship. There's no two ways around it. I don't think that means necessarily that we have to discount everything she's saying, and quite honestly, it doesn't seem like anyone's really doing the work to try to find the truth of this case. So I think what she is doing is extremely valuable. Now, I'm at a little bit of a disadvantage right now because the website, which should be at chriserick.com, for some reason, as of me filming this just a few hours ago, it went offline, or it started erroring very badly, and I'm not able to access it right now. So I'm not going to be able to share a lot of the information on it that I wanted to share with you guys. Luckily, I did pull some images down and was saving them locally, so I still have those that we can go over. And I did find on Google Images there's a couple of other pieces that we're going to take a look at that are all from there. So with all that being said, let's jump into this case and see if we can make some sense out of what happened to Christopher. First of all, we're going to start with a CBS News story. This is from August 6th of 2014, and we can see the title here, Charges Coming in Cyanide Poisoning Death of Texas Man. And right at the start of the article, we see this is taking place in Midlothian. And if you guys are familiar with my coverage on the Terry Missy Beavers case at all, that is also from Midlothian. I just talked about Midlothian in another video where I was talking about crime statistics and how they didn't have any murders registered for a certain range of years. It's possible that they're keeping that crime statistic so low by possibly not processing these crime scenes properly. At least in this particular case, it seems like that might be possible. Christopher Erick was found dead in his grandmother's house about 30 miles from Dallas in Midlothian, where he was living at the time, on November 10th, 2012. Authorities initially said he died of natural causes. An autopsy found that he had 2 heart attacks just before his death. Yeah, and this guy is very, very young to be having issues of that nature. It's not unheard of, but to have 2 heart attacks at that young, I don't know. That immediately sets some warning triggers for me. And one of these heart attacks, it was noted by the medical examiner, probably happened 2 days before he died, which would put that back on November 8th. This was a significant day in his life. He had actually gone to court over a charge of trying to sell one of his prescription drugs. This is a person that was struggling with prescription drug abuse. It was Adderall, if I remember correctly. And apparently he tried to sell some to a friend of his and got busted. So he was facing a court date for that on November 8th. And apparently some point on this day, November 8th, 2012, the guy has a heart attack. Now, he doesn't seem to seek help, or if he does, he doesn't get to any type of hospital or anything like that. It seems like he just goes home back to his grandmother's house where he's living, and I don't know if he just tries to sleep it off, but that's kind of what the assumption is. But a month later, at his mother's insistence, the medical examiner tested a vial of Erick's blood and found that he had lethal amounts of cyanide in his system. His cause of death was changed to cyanide toxicity, and the manner of death was changed to undetermined. Now, what's interesting about that is, first of all, apparently he had left a living will behind where he asked to be cremated. The family seemed to get that done very quickly. So when his mother was insisting that she wanted to look for other evidence, it was kind of tough. Luckily, there was some of his blood still around and they could test that. And they did find that there was a very high level of cyanide in his system. Now, apparently cyanide poisoning can happen in a few different ways. You can do kind of a low dosage over a long period of time, which sounds to me like someone that's trying to cover up, maybe poisoning someone else. Or you can actually do a high dosage all at one point, and that provides some different information in terms of the medical examiner's report. According to what I understand about Christopher's report, it looks like it might have been more of the long-term exposure going on around here. Now, where this gets really interesting is in the footwork that Kim has done on this case. She has found traces of orders of cyanide, one of them coming from Amazon.com, which I was just kind of blew my mind that they would even sell something like that. Apparently they have since removed it. There are a number of deaths by cyanide resulting from purchases at Amazon.com, which I think is mind-blowing. But in Kim's research, she did find several other orders from different companies that had happened earlier in the year. She did some footwork on them, contacted those companies, and it is her suspicion that his grandmother, her name is Pat, might have been forging some documentation around these orders. For example, she provided an email where she supposedly replied to one of these companies to cancel the order, that it was a suicidal person that had made the order of cyanide. Kim did some footwork, contacted those companies, and tried to verify that they indeed did get those cancellation notices. Apparently, they say they haven't. But the biggest one, which really is very hard for me to get around in terms of thinking that something in terms of foul play might have happened here. The biggest one is there is a letter from Amazon.com. Basically, it's shipping notice, and the email address on that says that it went to Christopher. However, Kim called Amazon directly, asked them about that specific order number, and confirmed that the email address that they had on file for that shipping notice was actually his grandmother, Pat. So it seems extremely odd. Outside of that, once this cyanide level was detected, the story that his family, basically his father and his father's parents, started kicking around was they assumed that he had indeed killed himself. What I find troubling about that theory is The container that the cyanide came in was never located. And I think in a lot of suicides, it's very typical for the item that was used to kill the person to actually be nearby. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me that he would care to remove that item or try to hide it in some way, knowing that, you know, there was going to be a medical examiner to come through later and probably detect what actually happened to him. I don't know. It's hard to tell, because if someone is truly in a suicidal mindset, you can never anticipate what they're thinking or why they're thinking that way or what they're going to do and why they're going to do it. But it does just hit me very, very strangely that the container is unknown. To this day, no one knows where this cyanide container is, but the assumption is kind of, well, he killed himself. As a matter of fact, there was a pretty, I think the only way to say it is rude, comment that came from a investigator at the Midlothian PD towards Kim, basically saying, your son wanted to die, he got what he wanted. It just seems highly insensitive. And you know, when you have a little factor like that, like, okay, you're claiming he committed suicide, but we don't know where the item is that he used to commit suicide. And not to mention the initial coroner's response to the case was that he actually died of some type of natural heart defects. I don't know. It really gets me scratching my head saying, what the heck is going on here? Outside of all that, when the new analysis comes out that there is indeed cyanide poisoning of some kind going on here, if it's self-induced or not, shouldn't that have kick-started a new investigation? Well, according to Kim, it didn't. According to her, nothing happened around that new discovery. They just kind of left it in the same classification of, well, this guy just killed himself and that's that. Erick had struggled with an addiction to Adderall, a pharmaceutical drug used to treat ADHD, and had issues with depression, according to Smith, who said that at one point her son did make statements that he wanted to die. Smith said she had tried to get help for her son and wanted him to move into a rehab facility, but his grandmother was against it and insisted that he move in with her. And this is another thing that's tough about this case. There's a lot of rough communication between the grandmother and Kim. Once again, this is an extremely strained relationship. These people seem to have very strong feelings against each other that are deep-rooted and have been around a long, long time. The grandmother did say some things that are pretty interesting. For example, in one case, she said something about that she would rather see him die rather than wind up back in one of those hospitals. The grandmother did not seem to agree with getting him official treatment. At one point, his mother actually had him committed in a hospital for 72 hours. According to Kim, he seemed to be responding pretty well to hospitalization, and she even got him to go in voluntarily into one, but then I believe his grandmother came and took him out. There's just like a tug of war going on with this poor guy, and to be struggling with an addiction is already hard enough, but when you have family members that are literally fighting each other over how you should be dealing with that, I don't think that can make any of it easier. Smith said that once her son moved in with his grandmother, her son became withdrawn and confused. Smith told CrimeSider she's convinced her son didn't commit suicide. She thinks he was murdered, and launched a website, a Facebook page, and a change.org petition to push for an investigation. As a matter of fact, I will have links down below for the website. Hopefully it'll be working again, as well as the change.org petition and the Facebook page, so you can check all those out for yourself. I certainly recommend that you check out chriserick.com. She has a lot of information there. However, part of what I struggled with when I was reviewing this case is separating what is truly evidence, what she knows for facts, versus feelings and assumptions that she has made based off all this information that she's collected, but also coupled up with some of her, I don't know how else to put it, but assumptions based on who these people are, what she thinks of them, and what she knows of them from the past. Are those things accurate? I can't tell you. Are they very helpful in terms of looking at this as a case and trying to figure out the truth? I don't really know if they're all that helpful. I think a much stronger position to try to present the good evidence that is actually in there is to thin it down to its core pieces that are extremely hard to refute. For example, the Amazon purchase being confirmed, that went indeed to his grandmother. It was his grandmother's credit card. There's some information that the page goes into about his actual bedroom and what it looked like, and the page is heavily alluding to the fact that there was some type of staging going on in that room, that there was some type of struggle. Once again, I don't know that I agree that there was a struggle that was going on in that bedroom. There are some very odd things. The guitar on the wall is hung in the wrong direction. It's actually backwards. The way that he was found on bed, lying on his back face up, is not very consistent with some of the pictures of the lividity that had set in that showed up a few days later. Essentially, that's just kind of, depending on the direction that you die, the blood winds up pooling towards, gravity basically takes it, and if you die on your back, you should notice that all the blood kind of drains to that area and you start seeing discolorization back there. It does appear, according to the pictures posted on that website, that he might have been face down when he actually died and then turned over at some point. Now, that could be a normal cause of what happened to him. I mean, if the grandmother went in and saw him and he was face down, he wasn't breathing, did she flip him over? This is a guy that weighed 150 pounds. I don't know if she'd be able to do that on her own. But what about the emergency response team? There certainly was some EMTs that got to the site, because I could see that there are those, I don't know if they're called electrodes, but those pieces of tape that are hooked up usually to a defibrillator, and they are on each arm as well as both of his legs. So someone did try some type of emergency response on him. In order for them to do that, I'm pretty sure that they would have rolled him over even if he was face down. So that's just what's kind of tough. You know, you're looking at this information, and yes, it could be interpreted one way, but without knowing for sure, without us having some type of record of what was going on at the scene when people were showing up, it's really hard to know the truth of those pieces of evidence. So the true heart of this article, though, is talking about a grand jury review of this case, and we will certainly get to that by the end of this video, but let's continue. There's another article at umbrellaofsuspicion.com. They did a multi-part series, largely based on interacting with Kim directly, and it goes into the backstory much more. It goes into some of the details pretty heavily. I think it's a really good read, and it's just another way to take a look at this case. I particularly like the backstory because it really clues you in into what type of person this was. This was a young man. He was extremely athletic. He was licensed as a masseuse. He was also studying Reiki practice, which I think is awesome. And he was a religious guy. In a lot of his writings, you will see that he is quoting scripture. As a matter of fact, one of the things that was interesting that was found in his room, let me bring up a picture of it for you, is a painting that was on his wall, actually kind of hidden behind a picture that was hung in its spot. But you can see here, it looks a bit like maybe a cross or a crucifix, although I don't know, the top end is a little long. And in this writing over here, it's believed that it says a king price. And it's kind of interesting knowing that this was in his room, kind of hidden behind this other picture. Another thing in his room that is causing a lot of question is this chair, which was right next to his bed. It looks to me like someone, is using this chair as a nightstand, but it is certainly worth noting there's some weird cables that are attached to this chair. This appears to be almost like a phone cord cable. On this side, it looks like there is at least part of a dog leash of some kind. I'm not sure, and if this is accurate, there is a lot of medication bottles also being pointed out here. But in terms of those straps, one of the theories that comes up on chriserick.com is that he was put in this chair and he might have been tied into this chair at some point. And Kim does show some pictures where she believes that there's bruising on his body that coincides with him being restrained in this chair. I spoke to her about this a little bit, in particular with a phone cord. I don't think that that's a very good device to bind someone, and admittedly, Christopher was not as strong as he had previously been. You could see some pictures, and this guy was pretty well in shape for a while there. But in the last year of his life, it looked like he had dropped a lot of muscle mass. And even outside of that, tying up someone with a phone cord only has 4 extremely thin copper wires inside of it and a plastic sheathing on the outside of it. I think he would have been able to break through that unless he was already weakened, which is certainly a consideration. But the dog leash, that's a bit tougher. Those are usually made out of nylon. They're usually woven, which is a bit tougher to get through. So it is curious what these items are that are hanging all over this chair. Here we have a note to Kim from a medical examiner. He's basically confirming that he has the cause of death to be listed as cyanide toxicity, and anomalous coronary artery and aortic dissection is a contributing factor, and that he recommends the manner of death be listed as undetermined. And down here, a very important statement. Had Christopher not ingested cyanide, he most likely would have eventually died due to the heart defects, which I know is a way that it seems like he's kind of dismissing the importance of the cyanide, but I actually look at that in reverse, as a statement of the cyanide did certainly directly impact him dying on that specific day. We don't know how long this eventually could be. He might have lived decades longer with those types of heart issues. There's certainly no way for any of us to know at this point. So it does seem that the cyanide was not just a contributing factor, they actually have it listed as the primary cause for his death. Some of the other documentation you can find on the Chris Erick website are the statement made by his grandmother about finding him, where she states that he looked peaceful in his death. It's kind of hard to believe if you consider the kid had 2 heart attacks within a 48-hour period that he would be looking so peaceful. And these are some big point of contention. There was at least 2 notes found. One of them is presumed to be a living will, where he is essentially saying who he's leaving his items to. And the other is believed to be a suicide note, although it doesn't exactly call out that he's going to do that to himself. It's kind of him apologizing to family members about how he fit in or didn't fit in, which I've seen some other letters written by him, and that does not seem to be out of the realm for the type of writing that he did do. So I'm not really certain if there's any context in that letter specifically that would lead you to believe that, you know, this is a guy that's looking to end his life and this is one of the last letters that he has written. But there is some pretty important statements in here. I wanted to tell the world how I really feel. Inside, I am so trapped and alone, broken and confused. My body is in so much pain daily, I struggle to get out of bed. Hard to escape the belief that I've already lost my family. And like I said, this doesn't necessarily feel out of context for the type of writing this guy was doing, and you have to figure with what he's going through. This is a person battling an addiction. He's reaching for faith in one hand and, you know, trying to fight off self-destruction with the other. It doesn't really strike me that this is terribly odd for this to be written in this way. Now, Kim has some serious doubts about, are this letter and the living will actually written by him? As a matter of fact, I think she has a friend with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, someone that was willing to look at some of this documentation for her, and she sent them a bunch of samples. She showed me the letter that they responded with, and the letter does seem to allude to the fact that there's some reason to doubt that these were indeed written by Christopher. However, I didn't see all the documentation that went over to the GBI, So I don't know what to compare it against. The only thing I have is what's accessible online, and I did find one letter in particular, and this is actually hosted at chriserick.com, but I can't get to the main website to confirm. But I believe this is a letter that was written to his mother from him on November 25th, 2011, and it's got the front and back page of the letter here. If this letter is written by him, my unprofessional opinion between this letter and this letter is there is a chance that they are written by the same person. I am not a handwriting analysis expert. I have looked into it quite a bit, but there are some strong things, particularly his very interesting I that he writes, that seems, it almost looks like a number 9. And it seems to do that on both letters. The slant of the lettering seems to be a pretty decent match. And there's a couple of words that actually happen in the letter that are very close. Like you can see at the end of the second page of the letter, he says, "Miss you," and you see the word "you" down here. And if you compare that to the final word on his letter over here, it's also "you," and those "yous," they look like a pretty strong match to me. But like I said, I'm not an expert. The GBI has their own analysis on this. I think that now what's strange about that is obviously this is happening in Texas, so the GBI really doesn't have any jurisdiction there. But just having a professional analysis like that, if I were you, Kim, I would do what they recommended and get an independent analysis done of those items and then see if you could try to push that to the right people to try to get them to look into this case. Because if, in particular, if the will has been faked, there were assets that were actually transferred as the results of that will. You know, his father gets a watch, his young sister gets a TV. That would certainly constitute as fraud. And although some of the statute of limitations are running out for example, like filing a civil suit for wrongful death, I think the statute of limitations in Texas is only 2 years. The statute of limitations for forgery and fraud, I believe, is 10 years, so that gives you much more time. And of course, for murder, there is no statute of limitations, so if there is ever evidence to prove that, they could certainly try to file those charges whenever into the future. Now, interestingly, there is also a letter from him that was written back in 2002, but it appears to me that he severely changed his writing in between 2002 and 2011, which I don't think is completely unheard of. He was born in 1989, so 2002, you know, he's only 13 years old or something. This looks like a 13-year-old wrote this, but it appears that his handwriting style changed pretty significantly after this. When I first saw this letter, I was like, whoa, there is no way that this matches that will and that last letter that were written. But the Thanksgiving letters really threw me for a loop. Honestly, I wasn't expecting to bump into that and to have that feeling about it. On top of the Chris Erick page, there is also a YouTube channel by Kim Smith. I will have a link to that down below, and it does include several videos. Some of them are actually evidence that she's pieced together. A few of them are phone calls, like the phone call to Amazon that I was telling you about. You can actually hear her talking to the person, confirming that information on this YouTube channel. So if you do dive into this case, I highly recommend you also come over to her YouTube channel and check these videos. Also, a couple of very touching tributes to her son there. Now, I've seen 2 change.org petitions on this. It looks like one of them has expired and you can't sign it anymore, but she has now started another one. And kind of along those lines that I was talking about trying to thin out the noise of all of her feelings about what happened there. This one is written very concisely. It's making very direct points about what she thinks should be looked into. And I do think that there is some value in approaching it this way. So I will also have a link for this down below. If you guys are inclined to, I do encourage you to please sign that. Maybe we can help her raise some more attention to this case. Now, something that has been bothering me since I started looking into this is, first of all, his physical appearance seems to deteriorate pretty harshly in that last year. Outside of that, we start getting messages where he thinks that his life should end. He thinks the end is actually coming for him, he says at one point in one of his messages. Almost, I actually think he says that God told him that his end is coming this year, which, of course, to many people sounds like suicide talk. But I'm also wondering if there's some potential that he thought he was sick, that he maybe thought that he was terminally ill. I asked Kim about that particularly this morning. She is not completely certain that he believed that or not, at least specifically about his heart issues. But she did send me a piece of paper that was found, which looks like handwriting. Quite honestly, the handwriting on that piece of paper doesn't seem to match the other handwriting for me. But I think the assumption is that this is Chris making some notes about what he's going through. And we can see on this document that he's talking about symptoms of having an aneurysm. And the rest of this document, I don't want to show it to you guys because there's phone numbers and addresses on it, but I believe that the rest of this document is doctors that he is looking to get consultations about this. So what I'm wondering here, we have him admitting that he's having trouble. In his grandmother's statement to the police, she said that it was pretty normal for him to be sleeping up to 24 hours at a time, which I think is really unheard of. His mom noted that there was some issues going on with him in terms of obviously being depressed as well, but also specifically being confused. And when you couple all that up with the analysis on cyanide, what are the symptoms of cyanide? Let's take a look here. Signs and symptoms of cyanide poisoning can be difficult to detect, but they include general weakness as number 1, confusion as number 2, bizarre behavior as number 3, excessive sleepiness as number 4. That means off the top 4 on this list already, he meets all of the criteria. Outside of that, coma, shortness of breath, headache, dizziness, vomiting, abdominal pain, and finally seizures. Of course, we don't have a lot of information. I don't know if we can confirm that he was going through all of those specifically, but for things that were noted from him and his family on both sides of this equation, those first 4 points hit very strongly. And that does make me wonder, was he potentially being poisoned for a very long period of time in a very incremental way that was affecting his health severely all the way through? As a matter of fact, this is just theory, wouldn't it make sense if indeed this grandmother did have some reason to want to do this, that would be part of the reason why she wouldn't want him in rehab, because then that poisoning couldn't continue? I don't know. It seems like a pretty viable option to me. Now, I did also ask him, what were the motivations? Why would the grandmother want to do this? I mean, what kind of sense does that make at all? I don't want to get into the weeds too far on this, but there might be some type of financial benefit that was going on around there. Kim does understand that her son was getting what he called his early inheritance, which doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. I asked, do you know who this inheritance was coming from? Was it from those grandparents that he was living with? And we kind of both came to the conclusion, well, that doesn't make sense because they're still alive, so why are they going to be doing that? Kim thinks it's possible that there was another inheritance, probably from the parents of his grandparents. Maybe that was due to him. And possibly, if he wasn't in the picture there anymore, maybe that money would go to someone else. That's about as strong as I could put it. Outside of that, you know, Kim has very strong feelings about Pat and just thinks that maybe she's just crazy enough to do this. Apparently, in their long history of disputes, there have been other times where she believes Pat has committed forgery, and her son have lied. It's tough. We're really getting off in the weeds in there, and that's part of what's so challenging about this case when you're looking at it, is there's so much family drama that's wrapped up around all the facts of this case. It gets kind of hard to separate these pieces, but I gotta say, for looking at the scenario of a long-term poisoning going on here, especially with the types of symptoms that we're seeing, I certainly think it's possible. We know there's cyanide in a lethal amount found by a medical examiner in this case. How the Midlothian PD can't reopen this case and reinvestigate it, I don't know, unless they are just at the point where they know that there's nothing that they could do to try to figure this out. His body, unfortunately, has been cremated. There's no further testing they could provide there. If they didn't process the crime scene properly because they thought this was just a natural death at first, like it was first deemed, or they thought it was just a suicide, which it was later deemed officially, even though the medical examiner doesn't deem it a suicide. I think the law enforcement considers it a suicide. Maybe they didn't do the footwork properly at the time to really be able to even investigate it at this point. And is that why the district attorney essentially brought Kim in before a grand jury to share whatever information she had, and then the grand jury says no indictment in cyanide poisoning death of a Texas man? Yeah, so Patrick Wilson, the DA, it appeared, you would think maybe was trying to help Kim, raising this to the grand jury. If you ask Kim about it now, she can't really go into the details of what happened then, but she can talk about what's happened since, and her feelings are that maybe this was just to close this case out for good. Now, Patrick Wilson is a little interesting. He gets his own article at Topix.com where people don't have the best opinions of this guy. The topic is actually Patrick Wilson protecting murderer, and in some of the comments we can see written down here, I'm confused about this prosecutor. Why will he not look at the evidence? What is he hiding? Is he doing this because the mother of this murder victim has brought to light his incompetence? Is it because he will only prosecute, quote, easy cases? I just don't get it. Is there some sort of relationship with the murderer he's trying to hide? Luckily, he won't be prosecutor forever, and there's no statute of limitations on murder. Perhaps his office should be investigated for corruption. A lot of big feelings around this, of course. People are upset. And quite honestly, getting to the end of this video with you guys, I'm pretty upset too. It occurs to me that something odd happened here. It occurs to me that there is an extremely strong chance that this young man was poisoned, that he was actually taken from this earth before his time, that he may have been suffering for a long time. It's a shame on so many fronts, and it's almost like that suffering has now been handed off to his remaining family members, and they're all having to cope with and deal with that, and they're doing so in extremely different ways that not everyone is agreeing with. I'm sure the family on his father's side aren't real happy with his mother and her pursuits in terms of investigating this and trying to keep awareness raised to this, and vice versa. I'm sure that she's not real happy with them and how quiet they've been. Apparently they removed his obituary from the company's website that they used. There's so much pain. There's so much pain around all this, and knowing that this is a guy that was a licensed masseuse, he was a Reiki practitioner, this is a person that was really reaching for spirituality, I think that he would be hurting also in seeing how his family is dealing with all of this and having to respond and deal with all this. So, I don't know. I really don't know where it goes from here. Do I trust the Midlothian PD? I'm already kind of questioning what's going on with that Missy Beavers case. They seem to have so much information there, and that case seems to be going absolutely nowhere. Now I hear about this case where potentially this one never even got off the ground. There was never a chance for this to be even looked at as a potential murder. It was just kind of chalked up to, this is a natural death. Oh no, wait, it's a suicide. But hey, either way, we don't have to deal with it, right? I don't know. It's really kind of bumming me out, and my heart goes out to everyone involved in this. And Kim, thank you so much for reaching out. Thank you for being so open and sharing all this information with me. I hope you're not too upset at the places where we don't exactly meet up, but I think for the most important point, I think we're pretty much thinking along the same lines there. It seems to me that this guy was poisoned. Those last few days were probably terrible. Unfortunately, we don't really know what was going on there. We don't have good information about what happened in those last few days. Is the will, is that faked or not? I don't know. I don't see it personally, but like I said, I'm not an expert. If there are experts that would attest to that, pay those guys, get that in writing, push that sucker forward, and see if you could try to get people to look at this again while there still are charges that could be filed for potentially for forgery and for fraud. What do you think, Brain Scratchers? Please help us out here. We want many eyes on this case. Thank you guys for already checking it out, but use the links down below. Take a look for yourself. Spend some time on the chriserick.com website. Dive into this information. If any of you have suggestions on what Kim should do to press this further, please drop them in the comment box below. I'm sure that she'll be monitoring comments on this. Thank you for joining me on today's episode. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Catch you next week back here on the Lord and Arts channel.